You're listening to the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast, presented by Pinelands Nursery. Here are your hosts, Fran Chismar and Tom Knezik.
Welcome back to a new Rooted Discussions episode of the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast presented by Pinelands Nursery. I am Fran Chismar.
And I am Tom Knezik. Welcome to episode 64 of not an episode, of a podcast that teaches you how to make native plant prison hooch. That's what I found out when I went home on after the last episode. Is I basically described how you make prison hooch, which
Wow.
I didn't know how to make prison hooch, and I asked my wife how she knew how to make prison hooch.
Yeah, that's, maybe that's something you should have known about your wife.
But our first Rooted discussion consisted of a team of native plant nurseries, which after the fact we realized they all specialized in growing herbaceous plants.
Which we didn't do that on purpose.
No, not at all. But it was a lot of like grass and like perennial growers.
Yeah.
And today we decided to kind of shift that to talk about people who grow woody plants.
Yeah, because there's so many aspects of our industry. You have the herbaceous, you have woody, you have seed, and each have its own intricacies. And we really, over time, like to discuss all of this. We want to make sure we get to the point where we have a seed rooted discussion, and that one's in the works, and we want to, we may even do a mixed panel at some point. We have nothing but time. I don't see these episodes.
So you already scared Matt out of the way. So I'm not sure what you said, but he was bolting for the door, man.
I was waiting for the screen just to fade.
I got like 15 phones in here. I disconnected like 13 of them. There's 2 more lines that ring right in the middle of your beautiful introduction. I'm like, of course, I'm that guy.
Sure. Tom,
I'm double checking that I did unplug my phone too, because it's rang.
We forget all the time. So, but today, we've always said about a lot of our competitors that we're extremely friendly with most of our competitors, and that goes the same for today. Our 2 guests today, and today's guests are 2 of my favorite people that we work with in the industry. So I'm happy to be a part of that.
You're just saying that.
Yeah, so we don't want to waste too much time, and we actually already heard from him a little bit, but you have first Jim McKenzie from Octoraro Native Nursery in is it Kirkwood, PA?
Correct.
Okay, and then
Part of Lancaster County.
Yeah, and then the other guest is Matt Gettinger from Matt. I always get confused with your nursery names because I feel like there's 2. So I'm gonna let you tell us.
We have a couple of DBAs, for a company that's as old as ours. It started out as a landscape contracting company by my grandfather in 1947. So, technically we're landscaping by Country Gardens Inc., which not a lot of people know.
I didn't know that.
Business as Country Gardens Nursery, which many of you guys have heard of.
Yeah. Yes.
And we also do business as a company called Long Island Natives, which is really our native entity that is devoted to the restoration industry.
So before we go to Jim, and it's something relevant that we've talked about in the office. So Matt, you're 3rd generation nursery owner. Are you actually owner or?
Yeah.
Okay.
So my father is still involved in the business.
Okay.
And we're 50-50 partners at this point in time.
So and what you've done is take a model and by incorporating Long Island natives, kind of change the model a little bit and breathe some new life. Not that it needed life breathed into it, just saying that it kind of changed the face of it a little bit. And we were talking about generational shifts in nurseries. And Tom, what were you saying? Like typically where it?
Yeah, we were just talking about this in the office the other day, and there's kind of what's the right word? It's like a bit of misinformation that says that a lot of second generations of, and this is just in relation to small business, that they kill the small business that their parents built. And it actually ends up being a 3rd generation more often than not. But it was the idea that the first generation kind of comes up with the idea and works really hard. They're coming from typically a poor background to build this business and create a life for themselves. The second generation grew up seeing their parents struggle, so they know the amount of work that it took to put into it. And then it was the 3rd generation, and this is why a lot of the 3rd generations of these businesses failed, was they just only saw success. They never saw their grandparents struggle, and they never really saw their parents in a role where the business wasn't successful. And but
Matt, you took a different
not
path.
always the case.
Like you left the industry before you came back to be a part of the family business.
Yeah, I mean, my story is, well, I would say a lot of farms as far as the ones that I'm familiar with here. And I sit on the board of Long Island's Farm Bureau. And it's a lot of, multi-generational types of farms. And, it's funny, two quick stories. Number one, we all know each other from going to some of the industry events, trade shows, most famously the Baltimore Man Show, Mid-Atlantic Nurseryman Trade Show. And I remember when I used to walk that show with my father when I was, first getting into the business. And, he would want to introduce me, and, most of the vendors, you start seeing the same people year in and year out. And it's one of the events that we all look forward to because you get to catch up with people kind of like we're doing now without having that industry event this year. And it's good for us to kind of, before we got on the air here, we were kind of given the opportunity to catch up a little bit.
Yeah.
And he used to introduce me to people, and people would say, "What generation are you?" And I would say exactly what Tom said. I would say, "I'm the generation that runs the business into the ground," and that was kind of like my, my opening line. And there was a lot of truth, to that statement. My path into getting into the nursery industry is a little bit, is a little different, but probably some similar stories to other people who are, second or third generations or fourth generations. In that, everybody, I grew up working on this farm in the summer times, and I'd come home in the summers from high school. I would be working out in the fields, pruning, and just working as a general labor hand. And I remember the general manager who was running the farm almost daily would come up to me and find me and say, "Whatever you do not come into the nursery business." And that was always, he would say it to me routinely. And he meant it. I think he meant it because we all know how hard this industry can be. And unless you're really cut out for it, mentally, physically, it's not an easy industry to operate in. So, when I went to school, I went to, now University of Delaware is so famous between Tuolumne and Biden. But I went to University of Delaware, not within their Hort program, to be honest. I mean, I took some Hort classes as electives, but I went to school for business. And when I graduated, and my dad said, go get a job. I was lucky to find an opportunity and was hired right out of school, but I went to work for corporate America. Okay. And so I did that for 5 years, 6 years. And then I came back to my family's industry knowing that I wanted the opportunity to run my own business. So I went out, got experience outside of the nursery, and then came back and said, okay, my wife and I are both from Long Island, and we were looking for opportunities here. And I wasn't necessarily going to come back into the family business, but when we started trying to make a life for ourselves and figured, we want to have kids, where do we want to raise them? This was just an opportunity that I said, you know what, my family has this farm. Let me go see what that's all about. If it doesn't work out, I can always go back into corporate America. But let me try that on. I worked there, obviously, growing up a little bit, so I knew a little bit of the kind of the pros and cons. And once I got into the industry, I guess for the officially as a young professional, that's when I had to start looking around and looking at where we wanted to bring this business so that we could run a sustainable. And when I say sustainable, I mean financially sustainable farm in the 21st century. And the rest of it is kind of just looking at opportunities and living around the country. I kind of had a very good idea of where kind of the landscape industry. I lived out in California for a couple of years, and so looking at water mandates and looking at some of the things that they were moving towards from a native planting standpoint. When I got back home and I kind of saw that there was this opportunity out there in our industry, it was something that I gravitated towards. It was something that I felt, it's, in fairness, and I think that you guys know this, and I'm always very transparent about it, we still run a wholesale yard up here. And that is still part of our legacy business. And it caters to landscape professionals across, a grand scheme of types of professionals, from high-end residential to public works type professionals. And once we started getting into some of the native planting projects that we were working on, it really had a rewarding experience or a rewarding end result when you got to see, okay, this was, a formerly disturbed site, and this is how it's going to be, rehabilitated, and why it's going to be important for the future. And, once I kind of saw that, there was, you become passionate about it. And once you combine kind of that passion with, your resources, and you start putting some things together, that's kind of what got that whole native side of our business going.
And that's how I felt when I came to this side of the industry from the ornamental side after all those years,
Okay.
but the other thing too is companies change over time. We're not the same company we were 35 years ago. We started selling to garden center chains, and it was berries, and it was,
Right.
it was things that maybe weren't native here. And it's evolved to get us to where we need to be, but there's always that step, and constant changing. So, you go from a third generation nursery owner. Jim, you're a first generation nursery owner. So how did that come about to want to start your own nursery? I guess at the time, really, native plants weren't like a fashionable, it's not the industry that it is today when you started your nursery.
Yeah, and actually, I don't take credit for starting it. I have a partner as well, and he had an environmental consulting firm down here in southern Chester County, and mostly all wetland mitigation, delineation, things like that. And he recognized at the time, obviously, it was early on in the profession. This is late '80s, early '90s. There was environmental concern. There was Pinelands. There was North Creek. There were some of the early adapters out there. But he saw it more from the standpoint of, the need for wetland mitigation plants. And so he started Octoraro as a spinoff of that consulting firm. And within 2 years, we were talking because both businesses were kind of getting beyond his ability to manage them from a growth standpoint. So, but as far as, we don't have any generational play into this right now, not at this point. But I actually look at it more. I even go back sometimes to think about it. I think this goes all the way back to my childhood. I grew up playing in the streams of western Pennsylvania, always around water from the day I got home from school till it got dark. And to this day, a lot of what our plants go to are water quality related projects. And I do believe there's some connectivity to that. And also then I got my degree at Penn State in the mid '80s in landscape architecture. So I was, it's a very diverse field. I was always drawn to the professors that were speaking more in terms of environmental stewardship and the sustainability part of things, just sort of getting legs at that time within the educational area. So when my partners, Mark and his wife, Kelly, I was a cubicle mate of Kelly's for 2.5 years in Philadelphia for a landscape architecture and architecture planning firm. And got a little disillusioned. That was during the booms of the '80s. I think we were solely responsible for the paving of most of Bucks County. And it just wasn't what I was looking for. So I took some time away, and then she wrote me and said, "Hey, things are going good." And I'd said, "If you guys ever get going, let me know." And so that's how it turned out. We spent about 9 months putting the partnership together, and that's where I am now.
Wow. So, and I don't know how you feel about me bringing this up. And if I have to go back and edit it out, I will. But Octoraro is a full-time job for you, but you have more than one profession. You went back to school and actually learned a different trade, and you have another job as well. Do you mind talking about that?
No, I'm also a registered nurse. I'm a mental health nurse as well. Back in the early 2000s, there was a chance that our lease, actually, we don't own the land that we're on. Our lease may not have been renewed. And so my partner and I were like, hey, do we really want to pack up this whole operation that we've spent 20 some odd years and move it to another location and stuff like that? And we both decided maybe not. So we were kind of on the edge about what we would do. But I just woke up and, my wife, the movie reference, my wife said I just woke up one morning and said it was downloaded in me like the Matrix, just got it. And I said I was going back to nursing school. My dad was a surgeon. So I went in it, the lease resolved itself, but I was enjoying myself so much that my partner and our employees all supported me continuing on. And so I kept going. And so it's good. I'm one of those people that need diversity in my life. I had been doing this for over 20 some odd years, and it was good timing. So so I do both.
See, Tom, that is why I feel lazy.
Yeah.
That is why, like, I don't know how I can't imagine balancing that because you still work as a nurse.
It's called no kids. For those of you who had kids, you know that would be hard to do.
That's true. I need to get involved more.
Yeah.
So Tom's involved in a lot. I know you all are. This is my involvement. So, so
I was going to say, I could really use, a mental health practitioner around here about, 10 months out of the year.
Yeah, trust me. We use it daily around here.
Sure, it comes in handy.
So
personally and professionally.
So we should go into, so people are a little bit more familiar with your operations if they're not already. Just what each of you, what your specialty is in the native plant nursery field. Like we all have our different specialties. And I know some of you may do more than just woody, and I know we're trying to discuss, some of the woody aspects of it. But if you could discuss, just what your niche is in the market. Jim, do you want to go first?
Actually, if it's okay, I was going to suggest Matt here. I failed to fill up my little water. I'm going to butt out, get some water, and I'll be right back.
This is very unprofessional right now.
I love it.
The B team in here today. Yeah, I mean, so our specialty, I would say, we're on an island.
Okay.
And so, our focus, moving forward and probably over the last, 5 years has been to focus on shoring up living coastlines.
Mm-hmm.
And so we really specialize in a lot of that coastal vegetation. We've got a tremendous amount of different, estuary systems that are here, bays. We've got the Fire Island National Seashore to the south of Long Island. And so there's just so much, coastal waterway systems. And we grow a lot of the woody shrubs that end up being utilized in some of those ecosystems, as well as some of the herbaceous as well that we do focus on. I would say that's, predominantly our specialty, catering to kind of that Long Island East End market. But that same specialty carries us through the 5 boroughs in New York City as well. Obviously, there's a lot of coastal waterways in that area, and then we're able to participate a little bit in some of the New England areas because it's just a it's a short boat ride from Orient Point over to Connecticut, and so that's kind of our specialty area where we try to produce or have stock ready to go to cater to those projects. And the other thing that I would say is that we are having a wholesale yard here and being able to cater, handle larger material. We become a little bit more of a one-stop shop for larger size material and then combining it with some of the restoration sizes as well, so that we can kind of cater to projects, admittedly more towards the eastern end of Long Island, where they may want, large calipered white oaks, for example, but that's going to be paired with some type of maritime meadow situation. So that's kind of our specialty.
Awesome.
I'm actually gonna, because I was confused for a long time about this too. So Matt, I'm gonna have you explain what is a wholesale yard, because I don't think a lot of people actually know what that is.
Oh, a wholesale yard. Okay. Yeah. So, a wholesale yard is basically I think of it as a kind of a retail garden center for professionals. So usually you're catering to more larger size, landscape size trees for professionals that are installing mature landscapes. For the most part, that's how I would describe a wholesale yard. It's kind of like a Home Depot if Home Depot was just dedicated towards landscape professionals and didn't have a retail component to it. So it's just dedicated to trade professionals. We're not open to the public, which, is, people are always trying to come in and persuade me that they are a trade professional when they're not. But it's basically a landscape store that's set up for the professional.
Yeah. Cool. What I was going to say earlier, and I'll go back to that in a second, is that the one thing I noticed when I first started here is that the residents of Long Island and the work that's being done there, they're very passionate about getting a local seed source. And before you, a lot of that wasn't available to them. But there's a lot of great organizations, Rewild's Long Island, just to name a few, and they really had been looking for that local native thing, because it is unique. It definitely is different than the Pine Barrens on Long Island are different than the Pine Barrens in New Jersey. So it's nice that that you were able to do that, because I know that need was there, and I'm sure like people like sighed, like yes, finally.
Yeah, I mean, to tell you the truth, I mean that's something that has been, there's been a need for it, for the last, well, that need still has not been filled. To be completely honest, it's been a challenge for us to get local seed. With the Long Island Providence, it's available in for some species, it's not available for everything. And there's a lot of politics, as you guys know, involved with being able to collect seed from certain areas. I would like to give a plug to the Long Island Native Plant Initiative, which was started as a nonprofit specifically for that reason, to kind of bridge the gap and make local seed available. So local ecotypical seed of Long Island available for the masses. And that organization has been around for just about as long as we've been around, quite honestly. So for about 12 years, they might, predate us by a year or so. I remember when that organization kind of first popped up, it was actually, the name was Long Island Native Grass Initiative before they changed it to Plant Initiative. And it was really all about being able to, produce local ecotypical seed for some important species that have importance to different plain areas here on Long Island. And that organization still exists today. They're starting their own founder plots and trying to really get more seed out there. But it's been a challenge for us, quite honestly. And that's why, Fran and Tom, as you guys know, I mean, we use you guys for seed source as well. And, it's a challenge for us to get that ecotypical seed here on Long Island. So we have it for some species. For some species, we just cannot get it. There's just not the means for us to be able to get it, to process it, to collect it. And so we're, it's still something that there's a lot of opportunity. And that's, as I look forward for the next, decade, that's, probably our number one priority.
And that's a tough pill for some of our customers to swallow when they're like, well, you grow most of these things. Can't you just grow sheep laurel for us? Or it's something, it's like, well, we're doing everything from seed. Like, you have to find a seed source, a viable seed source. Then you have to learn how to propagate that plant. It's not just because, you hit a home run on some things behind the scenes, you may have swung and struck out for 20 years before you finally hit that home run and figured out how to do it. So it's not as easy to do everything. It takes small steps, and over time it continues to grow. But Jim, what is your niche in the native plant nursery market?
Well, I was thinking before we started this, you could probably make this your shortest podcast on history, and Matt and I could just say everything that Pinelands does. We could all go out, have a drink someplace, catch some food, and
But I don't think that's true, and I'll explain why.
It's not. We are presently just native trees and shrubs, woodies only. But you were talking about the dynamics of businesses changing. We didn't used to be that way. We originated as Octorara wetland nurseries, and we were about 80% wetland herbaceous aquatic species. And that was driven by, as I said earlier, a lot of the wetland mitigation that was happening in the 90s, and only about 20% woodies. But over time, several things happened to that market for us, particularly freshwater wetlands. One is the goal of wetland mitigation actually started to make sense. Developers and highway departments started avoiding developing in wetlands because it was so expensive to mitigate those impacts. So that was sort of the whole point. It's like, so, even though it affected our market and we gradually start to see that decline for that freshwater wetland herbaceous aquatic, it was because like we were doing the right thing from a design community. We were avoiding these impacts. And so therefore there was a decline in that. And at the same time, there was starting to be more focus on Pennsylvania streams. We're only second to Alaska in terms of stream miles in the state. And we have a lot of very degraded systems from our legacy extraction industries of coal, acid mine drainage. We've got legacy sediments in all of our valleys from the thousands and thousands of mill dams that blocked up our valleys and things like that, and highly eroded. And a driving factor is that 86% of the Chesapeake Bay drainage is in Pennsylvania. So the bay, while we don't have the bay, it certainly is a major impact from Pennsylvania, and that's from whether that's point source or point source solutions. So more and more focus started shifting to our streams, and therefore more and more focus started shifting to the woodies. And over time, it got to the point where we got down to just a couple of greenhouses of herbaceous, and we were like, hey, you know what, this is kind of silly right now. We're just, it's just not there. So we decided to make the full switch, change the name, and that was where we got to today. And to this day, those water quality and stream initiatives largely drive our business. We were also fortunate to be a part of the Maryland Reforestation Act of 1991. Personally, I'm in favor of every state in the union having a Reforestation Act, but unfortunately, it seems like Maryland's the only one. But so our proximity to there also provides opportunity, but we're pretty much a whole mid-Atlantic based company.
Now, I think what divides all of us is our location. We're coastal plain. You're more where you're at. Is it Piedmont or Appalachian?
Yeah, it's Piedmont.
It's Piedmont. So,
but we sell across the entire state,
yeah,
which is
yeah.
Appalachian Plain from where I grew up, Appalachian Plateau to Ridge and Valley, down to coastal plain around Philadelphia. So we've got it all.
So you have location, and you have size, and you're doing some unique sizes that not everyone does, which I find interesting as well. So even though we may grow a lot of the same plants, we don't necessarily grow all the same sizes.
Mm-hmm.
So, and there's different needs for different product types, and it suits it. So what I do want to go just briefly into sizes a little bit of what sizes you do grow, like what do you specialize in and why those sizes? Jim, you want to go since we're...
Yeah, we grow everything from what we call our container seedlings, which is our smallest sellable size, up to a 7-gallon container tree. Generally, both the trees and the shrubs available from container seedlings, 2 gallons and 3 gallons. Trees generally 2s, 3s, 5s, and obviously the container seedlings. So the container seedlings, for people listening, it's sort of like the equivalent of like a 2-quart pot. It's also known as tree bands within the industry. Some people call it as a large tubling, but it's the 3x3 inch square pot, 9 inches deep. They're sold in flats of 25. And right now there's a lot of push on that size for us because we have some large contract grows with several customers for riparian reforestation, and that's driving some pretty significant volume for us. But we certainly have room for everything. Most of this restoration work, there's no silver bullet out there for this type of stuff. People have preferences, they have budgets, they have site constraints, all of which creates, they sort of dictate what they want. They all come with the post-planting maintenance. I don't care what size you're planting in, you've still got to address that. So we have people that just prefer going with larger 2 gallons to 7 gallons and off they run. And we have people that go with the smaller stuff and, tree protection and tree shelters. So the smaller material is sort of driving things right now, but I fully expect that to come back into a little bit more balance in the next 3 to 4 years.
What I love about your containerized seedlings are that there's enough heft to it. Yes, it is a smaller plant, but there's enough heft to it, especially when you get into your region and you're dealing with heavier soils. For survivability standpoint, it gives a little more top growth to fend off some I don't want to say competitors. Yeah, it's still, I know it's still, but it's other competitors as well, just invasive pressure, things like that. And it has the root growth to stand up to those heavier soils. So I think that's a unique size that you don't really see that is very special size and needed size in our industry.
It's a good growing system. It's an expensive growing system. And with the price of plastic, as we all know, with COVID related supply chain issues, it's getting even more expensive, but it's an air pruned container. It puts a great root system on the plant. Some people approve them. I think the state of Virginia accepts them in lieu of 1 gallon containers just because of that root mass. So, but yeah, it's a good size for us, but we also enjoy the larger material, and it's fun to have a 6 to 8 foot tree too.
Now, what I commiserate with Matt with you mentioned larger trees or caliber size trees, having worked at Princeton Nurseries, that's a production plan that you put together. Sometimes, we were growing it from seed or tissue culture or grafts ourselves. Sometimes that's a 7-year plan before that plan is saleable, and you don't know what the market's going to be 7 years from now, and you don't know, especially if it's design spec, there's going to be a job that needs those trees. So I know how difficult that is, and I appreciate therefore not too many people do it. So I appreciate that you're still doing it.
It's well, the reason that we're still doing it is because that's what I walked into. Quite frankly, is we were predominantly a field operation when I started. We had some container production, but certainly not to the extent that we have it now. And so we just really didn't know any better. And I wish there was like some other explanation, but really,
yeah,
I feel like that is certainly part of it. It's because that's what we always did. At least that was some of the answers that that I was getting when I was starting to ask probably too many questions. So so it was listen, everything, the grass is always greener.
Yeah.
And everything has its fair share of challenges. The staple for the industry from a woody standpoint and the predominant tree spec that we used to grow for, and a lot of it was due to the contract that you guys are, very much were a part of as well from a supply standpoint and working with me. And that's, a large part of, how our relationships had started too, with that Million Tree project in the restoration side of that business, or the restoration side of that contract, I should say. We were growing 16,000 native trees per year for New York City parks, and that was a 2-gallon spec. And, before that, we weren't really growing trees in a 2-gallon spec. And quite honestly, we still do some in 2 gallons, but I've kind of gravitated away from that just due to some of the challenges that we have, trees blowing over, et cetera, et cetera. And so we do a lot more, 1 gallons, because we just have a better system for it, figured out. And then, for trees that we want to get into that, 4 to 6 foot range, we'll grow them in a 3-gallon. And so that dynamic shifts, depending on the contracts or whatever your target market is, and trying to understand where that need base is going to be. I think it shifts around your production. But we certainly still do field grown, trees, albeit we don't do as many different species in the fields as we used to. Number one, just because we've converted those fields over to container operation over the last 10 years. But any of the, a lot of the evergreens we'll still do in field production. So we're still doing Eastern White Pine, we're still doing Pitch Pine, we're still doing Eastern Red Cedar. So we're growing those species. We grow a tremendous amount of bayberry in the fields as well. So we'll still do a lot of those woodies, where it makes sense in the fields, and because we have a market for those trees as they mature. I mean, and for better or for worse, I should say, because a lot of times when you feel like you could be into a really efficient production plan, there's always that thought in the back of our minds, well, somebody was looking for that 14 to 16 foot pitch pine. So, we might as well just keep them in the field and grow them on, and so you, sometimes you learn some of those lessons, or you have to kind of, like you said, you make a plan in the winter time, this is my production plan. And then, 2 weeks later, you're shredding it or throwing it out throwing it in the trash and changing your plans based on, a job that occurred or a market opportunity that you didn't foresee a little bit earlier. But yeah, that production cycle can be challenging on, a 7, 8, 9, 10-year turn. Just to mention, I think this is my 12th year in this nursery since returning.
Wow.
I think we just maybe 2 weeks ago cleared out the last legacy field item that I had when I started that I had not planted.
Wow.
Which was a field of Eastern Red Cedars, believe it or not. So we had kept those cedars because on Long Island, there's a tremendous demand for landscape size cedars up to, 16, 18 feet tall. And so we had kept those cedars in that block. And that was the last remaining legacy block that I inherited when coming back to this farm a little bit over a decade ago.
Wow. And every product size has its challenges. Like if you're growing trees in a 2-gallon, there's only so much of a shelf life for that before you have to get that up the door before it's root bound. Sure. If you do a larger B&B, it might be most natives, not all, but in the Northeast, a lot of natives are fall dig hazards. They don't like to be harvested in the fall. So now you're limiting yourself to a spring. And how do you know what to harvest if it's not sold? And how much do you want to hold? They all have their challenges, but they're all equally rewarding, because someone's doing it because the demand is there. Someone's telling you, hey, I have a need. And especially in Long Island, yeah, there's and correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, like you definitely have your restoration purposes, but if some of this larger stuff is going to a lot of the beach community, you can't put small little 1-gallon trees in front of a $2 million,
Mhm.
$3 million, $5 million home. It just doesn't, for scale, doesn't really work out quite the same way.
Yeah, 100%. And then, I mean, right now, we're getting a lot of that overlap too, which is great to see. So, you're starting to see landscape architects, designers start specifying more native.
Mhm.
And, so the more that they specify, the more, we see that opportunity to grow larger sizes for those opportunities. And now that native plants are becoming not just used for the restoration industry, but they're finding themselves in, kind of that, that hybrid ornamental native residential site. It's cool to see.
Yeah.
But the challenge again is that we're farmers, and so when we see that opportunity, now you gotta, it's one thing to have 3,000 2-gallon plants. It's another thing to have 3,000 15-gallon plants, right? Just the amount of the scale of the operation and the space that you have to try to find to grow a residential grade, ornamental native plant in a large size. It really is exponentially more square footage that you require. And so all these factors come into play, when making those types of decisions.
Yeah. And Jim, is that something that you see as well? Is it seems like a lot of the native plant crowd is do-it-yourselfers. They want small sizes. They want to, a lot of them want to just grow it from seed themselves. But like what Matt was saying, a lot of these landscape architects that are working on some of these higher end residential homes, well, they're trending more native. Is that something you see in your area of the country too?
Yeah, oh, yeah, absolutely. Matter of fact, I think, a series of events here, I mean, you have to really step back in the whole, we've been involved in this for 30 years. And, when we first to the shows that Matt spoke about down at Mance, we were one of like 3 growers that were advertising for native plants. Now you can't walk the show without everybody having a native plant banner out in front of them. So one of it is just over these decades, the drumbeat has been going, and native, garden magazines have picked up with it. The traditional trade has picked up with it. You now have got the nativars and the cultivars. So you've got the industry walking that way. The conservation and environmental restoration community has certainly continued to walk in that direction. And I think just within the last couple of years, when you see the effects of the gardening public getting hit with the information about Doug Tallamy's books and the pollinators and the benefits in the National Pollinator Institutes, I mean, agencies, government, they're all sort of on board with this, academic institutions. I mean, there's just been a lot of movement for a long time. I'd say it's always been a gentle but noticeable slope of increase in demand. I think you throw COVID and everybody went out into the yards and rediscovered and stuff like that. We saw a tremendous boost in terms of that sort of, I call it our retail market. We don't do a lot of retail, but we sell to people that specialize in natives and retails. We also sell to a lot of nonprofits that have sales for their fundraising and extending their mission and things like that. And yeah, we got repeat sales, once they were able to be open during COVID. It seemed like that market was definitely hitting, and I don't personally believe it's going to go away. I think you're going to continue to see more of that demand, and it is that overlap of restoration versus, I call it either the customized commercial or the customized residential. It's the folks of the Larry Wieners of the world and folks like that, the garden designers that are specializing in these crossover projects for the residential. Maybe it's a small garden plot in Philadelphia. Maybe it's a 20-acre horse farm out here in Chester County. It doesn't matter. The demand is definitely there, and we're seeing an increase of it for sure.
So I did want to touch on, and we've all kind of mentioned it, speaking of the public and the awareness to public, the 3 of us sitting here talking are all wholesale nurseries. So I just, and that's disappointing. A lot of we're probably 50-50. 50% of our listeners are in the industry. The other 50% are homeowners, and they're going to listen to this and get excited, and then at the same point get disappointed that they can't purchase from any of us. But there's a reason for that, and we kind of discussed that on the last podcast with growers. And I'm just curious your reasons why that each of you chose to be a wholesale nursery as opposed to a retail nursery. And I'll start off with, when we interviewed Don and Suzanne Kinesic, Suzanne said, well, my reason was selfish. I didn't want to work weekends and nights. I wanted my weekends. So we chose wholesale. So, and it's, and I can see that. So I'm just curious each of your reasons for your business type.
Yeah, I mean, I can go first. I mean,
Yeah.
we again, going back to kind of, and I hate to keep saying that, but I inherited a wholesale business, and so that's where we were. But I think that every generation or every manager that comes onto a farm always wants to kind of test the waters and just make sure that they're not missing an opportunity. And so, my partner is my father, and just even we talk about all different types of things, but I'm sure at one point we discussed, hey, is there an opportunity here to sell retail on the weekends? You go through all those conversations. I would imagine most nurseries have those types of conversations, even if the answer is, here's why we don't want to do it.
Yeah.
And in his rationale was very much like Don and Suzanne's, which is, you work so hard during the week. There's only so many hours you can spend with your families, and so if and so the retail is tough with giving up your weekends, and I think that was a big portion of why we went the wholesale route. And then the other part of it is retail is just tough in general, regardless of the industry. Retail can be tough, and we all know that it's that one squeaky wheel, person, customer, and that is very challenging to appease. And for one reason or the next, I mean, that you try to limit. We have so many headaches that occur day in and day out. You try to limit that, and so retail is a whole nother world of headaches that, quite frankly, I think all of us have just a limited amount of mental health, and that's where maybe Jim has an advantage in this conversation.
And it's definitely a different mindset too. You couldn't plug me in to do retail sales. I may be good at it for a small period of time, but I'm not wired that way. And I'm fortunate that I found the wholesale side of it first, because otherwise it may have pushed me out of the industry or any retail industry. But Jim, how about you?
My first question is, how do you guys get away with not working weekends? I'm in the wrong profession, or I'm working for the wrong company. I mean, that's the mystery to me, man. I'm working weekends.
There's working weekends, and then there's like working retail weekends.
First of all,
those are different.
Don't ruin it for me, Jim. Don't. You're stop. Cut.
Well, listen to Tom's comment earlier about unprofessional and walking away from the podcast. Just remember who sent the invitations here.
Well, I will.
You knew what you were getting into
before you kick in. Having worked at numerous nurseries before I ended up here, all of which we had Saturday hours. And you find that those Saturday hours were clustered in with people, not your best customers. There you were a customer that couldn't be organized enough to get their business done.
We said no cursing in the beginning. I know you want to.
No,
they can't get their what together.
No, they couldn't get their business together in the regular work week, and they don't really know. Or you have like a weekend warrior or something like that. So you were open and you're doing some business, but it wasn't productive business. It wasn't your best customers. You were there getting work done. So that was the reason to do it. But you just kind of realized, I think everyone that having done it, you talk to other nurseries that are doing it, and you're like, I don't even know why we're open on Saturdays. It's not accomplishing anything. So when I came here and they had already realized, the customers just realized, hey, you're not open on Saturday. I need to get my stuff together to make sure I get it by Friday. Mm-hmm. And it works.
Yeah.
I don't think we've gotten.
So when I started here, we during the busiest parts of the year, we had someone stay late till 5. Normally we'd close at 4:30, but we had someone stay till 5 just to answer the phone. And I kind of put the kibosh on this. And the people who call after 4:30, everyone knows we close at 4:30. Yeah. The people that are calling after 4:30 are usually like a pain in the neck. like Fran was saying, they don't have it all together and couldn't get it ready by the time that we were open. And there's that being said, I'm staying here in the office until 5:30, sometimes 6, getting stuff done. And I always end up answering the phone when it rings. And it's still, there's 1 out of every 10 is like really good. And that
You-
might even be generous,
you-
but then it's that one makes you keep picking up the phone. So,
And
but,
I think, listen, retail is a very different business. I don't even
Oh, yeah.
equate the two. You really, there's such a different business models. It takes a different personality. It takes a different everything. I really don't believe they're even, yes, they both sell plants, but they are very, very different. And I'll be honest, I don't know. There's a few maybe, but I don't know a whole lot of people that do both well. I don't think there's many people that do wholesale and retail very well. It's kind of like the landscape contractor that might want to have a small nursery. I think it's very easy to just spread yourself too thin. If you want to do it well, I think you got to pick your best. And just like, ours was always geared towards the restoration community. This was built towards contracts and these types of projects. So it was already set up for more of a wholesale. But I have worked in retail, as I'm sure others have. And, you can take it for a little while. And unless you're really driven by retail, it's a whole different. I've consulted with a couple of nurseries in retail, but it's not even the same business.
it's a different infrastructure. So you couldn't operate
Absolutely.
retail with the amount of employees that we have now,
Right.
or office personnel. We'd have to hire 3 more people to take phone calls, probably easily to handle retail, because
But
there's just not enough time in the day.
Yeah, but that being said, like on our website, and we purposely do this, is, we've got the button right there that says find your retail nurseries. And so we've got, and I'm always asking, if you know of anybody else that sells retail, by all means, let me know. We'll get them posted. And so you go to our website, you click on a box, and you'll get it by the states around us. And, our whole thought in this is we can help supply these places. They might be buying all of our plants for bump ups into larger sizes, growing them on, or they just might be turning them and doing what they do. But I'd rather have those people that are really engaged. And it's so encouraging, because 20 years ago, retailers and straight natives were failing. They couldn't survive. Now they can. They're a little more business savvy. They've got a lot more diversity. They might be combining it with a wine bar or something like that, or poetry readings or coffee, or they're understanding that they are retail and the natives are a component to it, but they've got a much better footprint to work on from a business model, and there's enough demand out there to keep them sustained. So I'd far rather promote that type of business than compete against it.
They're becoming teachers,
Yeah.
which is a great thing, and it's they're passionate about it. They're the retailers that specialize in natives are living that lifestyle, which I completely appreciate. And they're walking that walk, and people can come along and see how it's done and what it takes. And I appreciate that more than anything. And that, I think it's at a point with awareness that those companies can exist and excel and grow, actually, maybe more than they want to, and we just need more of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, they still suffer the same headaches that we do, and long hours and challenges and stuff like that. It's just a different business model.
It's what's interesting is the the kind of the pitfalls of the mass market appeal of native plants. If you'll allow me to elaborate a little bit, a couple, going back 5 years ago, we started a little bit of an e-commerce site for retail consumers. And it was based on basically, number one, just a lack of outlets for us to be able to turn people to when they would call us looking for native plants. And the one thing that I did find, which is why we kind of catered to this at one point, number one, is because I really had empathy for these consumers that were really trying to seek out these plants because they cared. Yeah. And the consumer that was seeking out these plants was very well educated, more educated than myself when it came to native plants many times, right? Really strong proponents for the benefits of native plants, and had a purpose for why they were looking for what they were looking for. And with mass appeal comes kind of the mass consumer. And with the mass consumer comes the challenges of retail. You know what I mean? And so, it went from a very knowledgeable based consumer that was looking for something like an evening primrose to somebody who, just wanted to flood their homes with pretty pink flowers that are native. And that's a very different consumer group. from a retail standpoint. And that's something that I've, over the last 3 years, for all the benefits of the mass market appeal of native plants, it is interesting to kind of see that dynamic take place and the change in the consumer. And these are all good things, but they just present different challenges. And for a nursery that is, really more of a production type nursery, like all of ours, what these consumers don't understand is we're not set up we're not merchandised like a garden center would be merchandised. And so we have to grow plants based on where they culturally want to be grown. And that may mean that, this, grouping of plants that you're interested in, they could be spread out all across, all 50 acres of our farm. They're, it's not a very shoppable type of experience. It's hard for people to really wrap their minds around that. And when I say it, I don't mean to offend anybody. It comes across as though I don't care about them or, don't wish for them to shop here because I'm just a mean-spirited owner. But it's really more of, the place is not, it's just not shoppable. The way that we have to, set up our growing production pads is just in no way, shape, or form a good consumer experience, if that makes any sense.
And we talked
agree.
about that, I guess the last time we had an industry roundtable, and then on numerous other times we've complained about it too. But because similar to what you were saying, Matt, is I started an e-commerce business where I would just basically list our availability on a website and people would buy it. And then it all started just UPS wise, with small stuff, and I'd ship it to them. But then there's demand for bigger stuff. So I opened up, COVID was actually opened up a lot because people got used to curbside pickup. And I said, well, I'll just set up some pallets along my driveway and people kind of pick up their orders whenever they want on weekends. And I don't have to be there. Because retail wise, I didn't have the time to be there. I'm doing all this other stuff. And even with that, kind of keeping like the customer at arm's length almost in a way, I didn't have enough time to do both. And I'm still doing both, but it's really with, you're saying with the mass market appeal, I get so many emails and literally that I don't have the time to respond to them all. And it sucks. And Jim, you said that there's people who are doing both wholesale and retail. They're not doing one well. Oh yeah, I'm not doing one well for sure, or as well as I would like to. But it's gotten to a point. We either have to hire people and get a facility and expand, or we got to find a way to scale this back to just get the people who know what they want and are passionate about it and are fine with that self-service, really.
And if you could have a walkable area, and again, when you pull into a parking lot in greenhouses, you don't, there's not an area where you can walk through and see everything.
And at Pinelands Nursery, you go to if you go to one set of greenhouse, you have 8 greenhouses in a row or more that are one species.
Yeah.
That's not what you get at a garden.
We don't even have walk-in business because if you were to walk in and try to place an order, it might take our guys an hour to assemble that order. And so everything's ordered in advance, pulled in advance. But, you have items that are in freshwater wet frames. You have items that are in saltwater wet frames. You have wetland plants. You have upland plants. You have so many different conditions. You can't recreate all those in a walkable area and have the right amount that people would want to buy. But I will share a secret that I don't know if I've ever shared online or even told you that neither of you knew it. So even though we never officially sold retail when I started here, there were a fair amount of retail customers in our system. And if you called in and you knew what you wanted and you worked as if you were a wholesale customer, we would sell to you. Like if you call up and said, hey, I need 2 flats of Panicum Brigade, I might just have a quick question, this and that, we would sell to you. But as Matt, you were saying, as awareness grew and the thing where you couldn't do it. Like it got to a point where we had to draw the line. It was probably like 10 years ago that we finally just said, we're taking all of those customers out of the system, and it's, we ask you to provide, your business information that you're in the trade. And because it's a whole different, even if you're a business not in the trade, it's basically your retail customer.
And talking about these retail businesses I think we should probably share, since we're all wholesale, why don't we share some of the retail businesses that we do work with in each of your areas that that you want to promote a little bit, just so that people don't take nothing away from this.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, there's some place that they can go that you like.
There's plenty of great nurseries doing this that we should promote to make sure that people find the plants that they're looking
So
for.
Matt, what are a couple that you know off the top of your head?
Sure, and the nice thing to be able to report and to be able to say is, I think like 5 years ago, I probably would have, drawn a blank here. And I think that the nice thing is that, this year in particular, we've picked up a couple retail garden centers, and what a blessing, it really is to be able to direct people to some of these other companies. So, more recently, Bayport Flower House in Bayport has started, stocking up on native plants, and Decker's Nursery is another one in Greenlawn, New York, and they've got a very good, strong following of native plant supporters. There's a couple other smaller places. KMS Native Plants, give her a shout out. Anthony Marinello, who owns Dropseed Natives, and I also have to give a shout out to some of the organizations that we work with, because they are really stepping up to the plate when it comes to organizing these native garden events. And so organizations like Rewild that you guys had mentioned earlier, season in and season out. So spring and fall, they do a native plant sale. So it should really give those guys credit. Northport Garden Club.
I was just going to mention that one, actually.
Yeah, Northport Garden Club on Long Island. So we're starting to see, some pretty significant, retail, traffic and at least an outlet for us to be able to direct people to. And one more I'll say is, the Peconic River Herb Farm. I don't know if you guys deal with them at all, either one of your companies, but they're based out of Calverton, New York. And just from an experience standpoint, they cater to a lot of native plants, and the experience is great. I mean, their grounds are wonderful. They're right on the Peconic River. And so it's a really good consumer experience. It's what, if I was doing the retail thing, it's the type of experience that I would like to provide to my target, demographic, for sure.
Awesome. How about you, Jim?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'll be honest. I would probably say go to our website, because I don't even, I mean, like especially the nonprofits, it's a pretty extensive list and it spans several states. So it's, I mean, in our immediate areas and stuff like that, some people that we deal with, there's Redbud Native Plant Nursery and Media, there's Yellow Springs Farm, there's Edge of the Woods up in the Allentown area, down in DC. There's Nature by Design up in the New England area. There's the Native Trust, formerly the New England Wildflower Society. And there's a host of others. So I don't, we have great relationships with all of them, but those are a few that are in our immediate area. But it's a growing list, and I think you're going to see more and more. And I think the e-commerce thing is definitely coming. And the other thing, Tommy, just to say is, it is challenging. I think the thing I want to point out is what you're experiencing is a challenge of success, not failure. Which is, again, it bodes well for the industry. It shows that the demand is out there. The question is do you want to do it, and how do you want to manage it? That's, that's really it. It's there. And do you want to do it or not? We deal with several e-commerce nursery people right now. It's all internet based, and they're doing extremely well. Specifically to the natives, there's like Izel.
Yeah, I was actually going to mention those.
Yep. Izel. You got Get Blooming over here now is another one, and New Jersey. Gosh darn it. Oh, yeah, I'm drawing a blank. Anyhow, that's what happens at my age. So anyhow, there's lots of good, and there's a lot more on our website that I'm not mentioning.
Awesome. I got to give a shout out to two more organizations, if that's okay, because I would be really upset if I didn't. So. Since I'm sitting here thinking, one is Save the Great South Bay. Okay. These guys are doing a tremendous amount of work, and they actually have a website e-commerce element where they sell plants through. And, that board does a phenomenal job of public awareness. And the other one is Native Landscapes Nursery up in Pawling, New York. I don't know if you guys deal with any of them, but Pete runs a great operation up there as well for those of our customers that are up in the Westchester area.
That's a very unique setting up there too.
So we have in New Jersey, we have a few Jared and Catherine at Wild Ridge Plants, great people, very passionate about what they do, and provide a lot of great information. Toche Nursery, it's Earth First. Yeah,
that's down near Cape May.
Yeah.
And I think the one, Jim, you might have even been thinking about was the Pollination, which is affiliated with New Moon Nursery. But that's online as well. They're basically doing what Pinelands Direct was doing, taking plants from New Moon and breaking them up into smaller amounts so that homeowners can get them.
Tom does Pinelands Direct. So
Mhm.
that's the company that Tom
And,
owns.
there's Summer Sweet Native Plants is down in Cape May area again.
There's one in Green
Thank you. That's the one I was searching for, Tom.
Okay, yeah.
Summer Sweet. Yeah. Thanks. New Jersey.
One in Cream Ridge. Do you remember? I'm
No.
gonna have to look it up because I
No.
feel bad. I can't.
Is it Good Earth Nursery?
Good Earth
Yeah.
Nursery. Yes, thank you.
I drove by there yesterday.
And there you
So-
go. So, and it's nice to see. I think if we were to have done this podcast, like Matt said 5 years ago, I don't know that we would have gotten a list like that. And there's a lot of great. I think Wild Roots New Jersey too is more of a blog, but they will source material from where they can get it, so people can buy it and make it available for pickup if you want. So there's a lot of organizations that are taking charge and trying to put plant material in the hands of people that want that plant material.
Definitely.
So, but I want to kind of get back on track. We kind of got, we
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
veered away. You know,
I'm ready to veer away again.
all right. So
What are we veering away? I thought
The non-industry
relevant
people, the
stuff.
retailer
We're
people are going to
talking
love
about
that section.
Bitcoin.
so one of the hardest things for me, having come to this nursery from other nurseries, when you're in a traditional wholesale nursery, there's renewable business. You're dealing with wholesale yards, or you're dealing with garden centers that know they take X amount of material every year. They'll place that order in advance. Our industry is a little bit different. There's not a whole lot of renewable business. So what are some of the reason why you choose the amount of how many plants you grow and of what plant, and what are some of your limitations to producing that inventory? Matt, you want to go first on that one?
Sure. So our forecasting methods. So, like you said, it's challenging. You know that you're going to take some risks out there, like we always do. But again, I'm kind of used to this speculation, just based on running the wholesale yard, and you kind of have, you're going to rely upon some type of past history, and so kind of what you've been selling for the last couple of years. Yeah, there's always going to be a little bit of a increase in some of the items that you think there's going to, where there's more popularity, I guess, that's driving your demand. I'd like to sit here and tell you that, we're just monitoring project after project, and, we're able to build a forecast model based on, the public works jobs that we see for the next 18 to 24 months. But, who has honestly the time for that, or the resources to really mine that level of data? But we do look at those jobs, and it's important for us to just look at them with an eye towards what are architects or environmental engineers, what are they specifying, and what projects do we see? What are the big ones that are coming down the pike? Sometimes, I look at it in a way that, from a business minded standpoint, I look at those projects and say, well, I may not get this project, but I know that there's going to be 5,000 less groundsel bush in the marketplace based on this project taking place, right? So if that means that we're going to, speculate on something, and we have greenhouse space to fill, I may say, okay, well, this is a good item to speculate on, because it gives yourself the opportunity, number one, to sell it onto that project if your supply chain, or if your customer channel is awarded that contract, or at least that there's going to be less of that plant out there, so that when the next project comes along that requires that same plant, all right, well, now I know that there's going to be an opportunity to sell it for the next project. I mean, that's how we're looking at it for the most part. Custom contract grows are always, a home run, right? I mean, I think that would be the preferred method of business for all of us. It eliminates waste in the system. We know how many to do. I mean, we all, everybody on this panel, we all give high fives when we know there's something that we can confidently grow, and we know there's a home for them, right? That's what we prepare for. But everything else, there's going to be a little bit of speculation. So we try, and we learn some things the hard way. We, sometimes there's just groups of plants or groups of there's species that we can't propagate well, and sometimes we learn the hard way on those.
Yeah, it's funny. There's a couple things. I was furiously writing notes while you were saying that because there were a few things I wanted to touch on.
That's a topic that I could spend probably the whole podcast because it's nobody has a crystal ball, and so trying to figure out what the right species, quantity, size, when you pair all those variables together,
Yeah.
I mean, there's infinite.
With contract grow, the one thing that I give Tom like all the credit really when Tom came in and started analyzing some of the projects that we supplied over the past, we realized that we kind of we love a contract grow if it fits who we are and what we do. And what we were having problems with were, say you had a job where they wanted 50,000 Spartina alterniflora, which we grow in 2-inch plugs, but they wanted them in quarts. You do that, and then the job gets postponed for 2 years. And then you don't have a market for those plants because you contract grow them, then the plants aren't viable and they're taking up valuable space because it's a custom environment that they have to be grown in. So you start looking at some of these things saying, man, it's great, but some of these, it has to be, we've kind of limited to, it has to be something that we already grow in a size that we already grow it. So if we're just talking quantities, or if we know it's like a quick turnaround, like we need these quarts and it's a large amount and we're going to take them in 3 months, and then you have time to do it. So you kind of have to look at it through different glasses because so many times you really want that job and you realize maybe, maybe it wasn't the best decision, but
I'll expand on what Fran was saying the other day. And it's funny because I just went to Costco for like the first time in years yesterday. I'm not a Costco shopper, but Costco is like a great model for how to carry products. And everyone who is a Costco shopper probably gets frustrated because the store is always different every time you go. And that's on purpose. So you have to find everything as a treasure hunt every time you go. But they do a really good job of cutting SKUs every quarter. I forget how they break it down. And they just trim off anything that's like underperforming. They stop selling it. And that's why if you went to Costco and you're getting something and you really liked it, well, it means a lot of other people didn't buy it if they aren't carrying it anymore. And they're constantly rotating new stuff in. And it's every once in a while they find something, oh, wow, we sold a lot of this and we're going to keep selling a lot of it. So we're going to keep that one on. And whatever rotated in and it's underperforming, they just keep cutting off what they aren't selling. And that was kind of the model that I was looking at when I started here was, man, if we aren't selling more than X of dollars of this plant, why are we even growing it? And we could use that space to grow something that we could sell instead of something that we aren't selling. So that was the whole design.
Which isn't necessarily the mindset that goes into a production plan sometimes because you're like, we can grow this. We know we can grow it. And we have the seed and we have X amount of space to fill up. Let's do it. So it's a better way of looking how to maximize that space. But the other thing I was going to mention is, and I don't know if the two of you feel the same way. I feel with job timing, it's become very cyclical. When I started here, it seems like we didn't have enough time to grow the plant material for the job. We weren't given enough notice. So you either needed to have it on stock or have it in stock or you lost that job or it had to be coming on soon enough for that job. Then I saw it shift to where you had 2 years to plan and get ready for that job. But you knew the bids were out there. You may have 10 or 15 customers bidding the same job and you would see it and you knew the time frame. Now I don't even see the bids. The customers are just calling saying, I got this job, and that wasn't the case 10, 15 years ago. It was just, I didn't even see it go to bid. I didn't even know this one was out. And it's like, oh, well, I have it, what can you do? So I'm seeing it go back to like, not enough, you have to have it or it's a very short time frame to get it ready or you're not getting that. And that's one of the ones where Matt said, I think you plan out like someone got this job and someone's selling all of this. So someone, that should help move ours because there's going to be less of it in the industry. So Jim, how about you? I hope I didn't take all your answer.
No, not at all. I think the biggest thing to me is that you're talking a herbaceous contract or a woody contract. That you can turn a herbaceous contract in a matter of months. Woodies, you need more time. So that's sort of a defining thing that's different from us. And we are fortunate to have contract grows, and we've been involved in some of those for many, many years. But they don't by any means represent the bulk of our sales. I mean, you're lucky if you hit 20% of your sales one year might be under contract. The rest of it's all, the crystal ball. And, I sometimes equate myself to a craps roller in the back of a dark alley, with a brick wall in front of me, because that's, it's basically what Matt said. It's history. It's looking what it's looking what your customers are asking for and stuff. But to your point, Fran, yeah, I mean, in some ways disconnected ourselves from that bid process by posting everything online. Our availability is there. It's very easy access. It's like people don't even have to go anymore to communicate with what they're bidding on anymore, and therefore you don't see it. So it saves a lot of time and energy for both me as the owner and responding to bids, but it saves a lot of time and energy for the customers. It's so easy. They can look at that website 24/7. Doesn't matter whether they're working the weekend or not. But it does remove yourself from the days of old where people were sending you their faxes and you saw all the bids coming across your desk. I rarely see them anymore. So I would support what you're saying there. And the thing is, I think we're all pretty fortunate in this industry right now is we're generally all selling what we can grow. And that hasn't always been the case. And that's a little bit to something other that I'll bring up later here about the whole business in the industry. But you can speculate and probably sell it right now. I mean, yes, do we get a little long on things? Everybody does. It's hard not to. But one of the things that we're going to be doing is kind of looking beyond is right now is I'm sure you guys are seeing it. We're certainly seeing it both within the wholesale, professional, environmental restoration, conservation movement, but also with regard to more of that retail segment. People want to see more diversity. They're requesting different species, things that we may have not grown in the past. And I think that's also just awareness to Matt's point earlier about the education of the consumer. They're becoming much more aware of, thinking in terms of not just plants, but ecology of their backyard or their project. And so therefore they're looking at that sort of diversity, and that's all well and good because we're all believers of diversity, but it does then force us to start looking at, okay, well, what are we growing and what not? And I'd rather not speculate on that. So we'll be doing a customer survey here in about a month, and we're going to go to that very target audience. We're going to say, rather than us speculate and guess what you guys want, why don't you tell us what you're having a hard time finding? And then that might, give us a little blueprint for the next 3 to 5 years if there's some crossover of species and you get that data mining in there and stuff. So that's sort of how we're trying to address some of the speculation, but there will always be an element of speculation.
Yeah, and I think when you get asked to do something that you typically don't do, it's a form of flattery because let's face it, we all have the same customer base. We're all selling to the same customers. They all know who we are. We all know who they are. So when they're asking you to grow something that maybe they know one of us grow and you don't grow, it's because they have a better relationship with you. They're like, I like dealing with you and I'd rather try to get everything from you. And it's tough because it's a great form of flattery, but it doesn't always work either. It doesn't always make sense. Like, even though you'd love to be able to provide everything for someone, sometimes it's not feasible. I know I refer people to both of you all the time saying, I think they're going to be a better fit for you.
Same way.
Yeah. So it's,
and I think the thing is the other thing that's hard for people to understand is you have X amount of space, you have X amount of time, you have X amount of labor, you have X amount of dollars. And, unless you start to see consistent demand, this is a product that has to be turned the only way. If you're sitting on these plants, then they become a problem. They can't, root circling, whatever it is, you've got to be able to move this crop. So while there are things that I would love to grow and, sometimes we get small requests for, very hard to put those small things into a production scale model. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's hard when you see limited requests for certain species.
Yeah, and some things don't exist because they're just difficult, and sometimes you don't know until you try. We just 7 gallons for us is newer. We've been doing it for just a few years, and you start thinking, oh man, if we grew pawpaw in 7 gallons, we could sell them all day long. Well, then you grow them, and after a year, you have roots 2 feet out the bottom of the pot, and the plant's 1.5 feet tall. And it's
exactly
tap
rooters.
Yeah, so you're like, this isn't really feasible. Maybe that's why you don't see them on the market the way you get requests, and maybe that's why you don't see them. So it's trial and error. It's a lot of different things, and it's as you mentioned, you only have so much time, you only have so much space, and you want to hit a home run. You know, that's what's important for the businesses or all the people that are working for you, that you provide a good living. So you want to have a good year, so everyone has a good year. And it's a tough balancing act. I don't envy any of your positions. I worry about that, but technically I don't have to worry about it. But I worry about it, you know. So it's hard. It's hard. And you know, in some years you hit that home run where you're like, wow, we didn't really have that one item we were super long on. And some years you have 5 items that you're super long on in large quantities. And you're like, what do we do with this? You know, when you make that guess and you're wrong, it's not that you can just move on. You're taking a loss. Mm-hmm. You know, hopefully you can find a home for it and someone can use it. But it's, you know, I've made those mistakes. I've made those mistakes more than once. You know, I'll make that mistake again because I don't have the crystal ball. But I'm just saying that so Tom doesn't fire me.
No, I do think that you know, it's a balancing act between trying to have enough, you know, diversification in what you do, you know, even from a species standpoint, because, you know, from a when I say plant, like from a manufacturing plant standpoint, right, it would be easiest to run the factory and produce 3 different items, and there are a lot of growers that do that, you know, and they're very specialized, you know, but I do find that, you know, our audience does expect us to have, you know, some level of diversity. And that doesn't mean that you're going to go crazy. So like when we do speculate, and especially if it's something new that we haven't tried before, you're going to do it, you know, with caution, right? And you're going to make sure that you move the ones that you speculate on before you go out and, you know, double that quantity or pretend that there's just going to be this, you know, huge awakening for this one plant that you never sold before, but all of a sudden, you know, it's going to be your saving grace. You know, but so I guess my point there is that, you know, there's a fine line with making sure that your, you know, audience is, you know, being catered to with regards to not just being so regimen that, you know, all we're producing is Little Blue Stem. That's it, you know, because that's, you know, that's the number one seller for us on you know, for our grasses. You know, you need a little bit, you need to be able to, I guess, let your customers know that you have the capability of growing more than just one thing. I guess for our target base, I would say that's important.
Because that's not sustainable. You have the year where no one specs any Little Blue Stem and all of a sudden you have no business that year, you know, but I think regardless of relationship, regardless of price, regardless of quantity, sometimes you win a job strictly because you can supply the whole job,
100%.
You know, because you have that diversity. And sometimes that's the winning formula for getting some of the jobs. And it's not that way across the board. You have so many different things, and that's what makes it difficult and challenging and fun. It's frustrating and fun at the same time. And I think for us, that's why we specialize more in smaller sizes, because you have the plus of a quick turnaround, and you can change gears. So the production plan is set by myself, our production manager, and our propagator, and we meet 3 times a month and constantly update that plan because you're doing small sizes. The downside is if you're wrong, those shelf life is short. So you're kind of, you need to try to get it right the first time. But
the good news is you didn't have 7 years into it.
Yes. Yeah. And that's the challenge that I'm familiar with. And that's a difficult challenge. I was at Princeton Nurseries for almost 9 years. And it wasn't until the end of my time there that I finally hit a production plan that I had input on. You know, it took, because it was a 7-year production plan. So it was right before I left that I finally saw production plan. I'm like, oh yeah, I was a part of this one. Before that, I was dealing with all the plans of everyone who had preceded me. And that's a difficult thing to walk into as well, because you know you had no control over that, and the market changes. You know, it just changes, and that's really difficult.
And I heard like 5 years after you left, like 5 years consistently, all the sales guys hit their sales quota due to your production plan. I hope you got a piece of that action over there.
Actually, they closed 2 years later. So
couldn't survive without you,
Fran.
I will say that just about every nursery that I've worked for prior to Pinelands Nursery has gone out of business. So that's not a track record I'm proud of. At least I can say they went out of business after I left. Maybe that's the way I should look at it. It was
actually, Fran, if you don't mind, it's in one of your questions. It's a little bit of a segue. You say, what do you think, a lot of the general public misconception, or what do you want them to know about our industry?
Yeah.
I'm going to jump on that because you just hit on it. This industry is struggling across this country. It is in a contraction mode. And I don't think a lot of people even see that or understand it. They can go out to, whether that's the box stores or whatever, they can still find what they want. But this industry is struggling. And there's a article in the Washington Post that's just only like about 2 weeks ago that talks about the struggles of the horticultural industry. And I'll see if I can find what date that was put out there. But I've been involved with the Landscape and Nursery Association of Pennsylvania for a better part of 25 more years. And every grower that I started with on the board or in any part of that organization is gone. And there's only one of those that has a generational shift that's into its second and maybe go into its third generation. All the other ones are gone. The knowledge base is gone. The production space is gone. So I think it was Chris Hewlin at Harmony Hills told me the other day that something like 2,000 production acres of horticultural crops are gone in Southeast Pennsylvania alone. You look at the things then that happened with the severe frosts and cold temperatures that hit Texas and devastated their entire industry. Labor is a huge problem. The bots aren't here to do our jobs. It's still a very labor intensive industry. You throw national and immigration issues on top of this, and you couple that with just the fact that it's not a very well promoted industry with our young people and stuff like that. I've been involved with this a long time. I have serious concerns about who's going to grow these plants in 20 years and where people are going to find these plants. I think that that's a very big disconnect, and I don't think many people know about it. That's why I appreciated that Washington Post article. It was forwarded from our director, former director at the Landscape and Nursery Association. So I would say that is one thing that is out there that people are not aware of.
And I think we may have touched on some of these things in the last rooted discussion where we talked about native plant businesses. But when I started in the industry in 1989, we were still selling 2-inch caliper trees for less than that when I left the B&B industry in 2006. And that comes down to value, what the end users value and perception of what that's worth. And it's not that the costs hadn't gone up. The cost had gone up exponentially to produce that tree, but the value wasn't there. And a lot of marketing, a lot of people have done a lot of marketing to show the value. I think what native plants, people now being aware and wanting it and seeing the value of what that plant does, not that it just looks pretty, but the pollinators that it brings, the wildlife that it feeds, the family it can feed, all the different aspects of air quality, water quality. They now are starting to see a value that can hopefully turn that perception around to help it, at least on our end. That doesn't help everyone on their end. And, a lot of nurseries do a lot of marketing and cultivars and research to find that plant that can prove that value. And it's ever changing. I think that's been good and bad for the industry as well, when some miss and it gives everyone's a bad taste, and every year there's another new plant that they're trying to. Connor Pyle was basically Star Roses was founded on the thing that people love roses. They love the same rose, but they're short-lived. So if they keep dying, they'll keep coming back and buy that rose over and over and over again. Eventually, at some point, you get burned enough that you're like, I like it, but I don't like it enough to keep buying it. I think there's land value where sometimes you're in an area that becomes so built up that land is more valuable as an asset than it is as a nursery. I think mental value, Jim, Glenn and I, our propagator, had this conversation that we're losing that generation of employee that passes down the mental knowledge of what has happened and why at the nursery for years.
Couldn't agree more.
That generation is meant, I had a tendency, or I don't want to say tendency, I had the luxury of having a lot of great people pass on a lot of great knowledge. They carried me on their back and handed down a lot of wonderful knowledge that hopefully doesn't die with me. But that generation now, that it just seems like, and those were people that maybe weren't college educated. They started on the farm as a kid, worked their way through mistakes and errors, trial and error. It's just, I kind of feel like there's a gap. There's a gap that I'm afraid that information is going to get lost, and that information is important for all of us to continue doing what we do. Matt, I don't know how you feel about that. I don't know if I hit any.
I think I couldn't agree more. If you look at some of our recent hires over the last 5 years, it's kind of interesting if you looked at it. And what I mean by that is purposely looking for the generation. Some of the newest hires that I have started in the what would generally be considered the twilight of their career, specifically because they have that knowledge. So these are guys that I've known from other farms, some of the best growers, around that I have access to, that, have kind of gone into semi-retirement, and I've brought them back out because, like you said, there's a gap there. There's a huge generational gap. And what I find myself doing, right now is, probably the best example that I can share with you illustrates this is, we just recently hired a soil scientist out of UMass last year. Great young man. His name is Eric Vegetto. And, I'm pairing individuals like that with a ton of potential with the older generation, to mentor them, just like they were mentoring me, because there's so much anecdotal information that goes into this industry. And it's important that, that next generation, learn. And just like I've been fortunate to learn from some of the mentors, I'm in a pretty agriculturally friendly area out here in Eastport, New York. I've got farms kind of surrounding my farms, and most of them are in nursery stock, to be honest. And I've, was just fortunate that when I got in, 12 years ago, these guys were still willing, capable. And I think that's one thing that you find about our industry in general is, even, with everybody you have on this call today is, this industry, what I was introduced to when I came into it was just the wealth of information and just the camaraderie of people willing to share that information with you, and that's what I've always appreciated, with talking to guys like yourselves, quite frankly. And it's without that, I would be lost, because it just takes, there's so many lessons, right?
Yeah, and with that, I think there has to be a certain amount of trust too for a lot of these guys, that information is their livelihood, and that's their job security, because they figured this out throughout the years, and that's what makes them valuable. I'm probably I just had this conversation with someone here at the office the other day, probably of the last generation that probably can be in the position where I'm at without having had a college education in our industry. It's changed over the years since I started 32 years ago. So I learned a lot of those guys, and it took trust, because I was a new guy coming in, and they had to trust that, I wasn't going to sell them out or try to take their job, or that was just security. So there's a lot of knowledge locked up there just out of being scared. I want to say, like, knowing that, hey, if I give all this up, you don't need me anymore. And that's a difficult thing too, and you can find some of this knowledge on the internet. I mean, business has changed, but you're not finding all the knowledge, and you're not finding all the right knowledge. And some things you just have to have a conversation, and to some people, that's not what business is anymore. The art of conversation is, I think, becoming more and more scarce. And listen, it's tough for me. You may disagree with me 100%, but I'm an introvert. If I know you, I'll talk your ear off, but normally I don't want to talk to anybody. So, it's having that conversation and getting into being a team and kind of working that out. So I love that you're pairing people together like that to kind of bridge that gap, because I definitely think
it's need-based, it's need-based, for the most part. And the truth of the matter is, it's a good working relationship for all parties, including myself. I'll throw myself in there as well, because there's things that, it's good to get some new, some new blood and some new science introduced into some of the practices that we have. And it's also good to, for some of these young guns that come into the industry to understand, why things were done previously and just alternative methods that worked, that for whatever the reasons are. So, I mean, I think that pairing for us, it works. Would it be great to have one person that's, an expert in that area and they don't need the help? Sure, I guess, but there's no, there's no one person on any farm that can do, all the different tasks that we all have to get done. So as long as you get the right people involved, it all comes down to people, right? Just like every business.
You have to look at it both ways. Like it's good to have that person to question why it's always been done this way, but you need that person with the knowledge to at least explain why it's been done that way and come to maybe a way to make it better, and it's
I think that,
it's challenging.
I'm sorry.
No,
I was just going to say, I think the thing is it's unique. And we're actually in the very same situation, Matt. We were very fortunate to just hired 2 young people that are, I'm just calling them the next gen. But my point is there's not enough next gen out there to take the knowledge that Fran's talking about, to take that stuff. Because, those gentlemen, they're semi-retired now. How much longer are they going to want to do this? And that's the thing is there is a gap of knowledge base that is growing by the year, every year, that people don't enter this industry. And there's people that are trying to change that. There's Seed Our Future, there's all that sort of stuff. But I mean, how many horticulture programs have disappeared from community colleges, 4-year colleges? They're disappearing like crazy. So it's a lifestyle that is not being well promoted to people. I'm all about STEM and that's great. But let's face it, not everybody wants to pursue STEM. They have other things that they could be doing. So that's where we need to sort of tap into that. But I think we're kind of rare that we have that right now. It's hard to find those people right now. Matt, you're lucky to have scored a couple.
Yeah, I mean, you go through a pandemic like we just went through, or we're still going through, right? And you think about, this industry in general. You're able to spend time outdoors, right? And, not being inside open air situations. I thought that we were going to actually see more of an influx based on some of these things. And I'm actually surprised that it was such a, that we can, I guess I'm not surprised at this point, but, I was a little bit discouraged, that we didn't have what I thought would have been as much of a, an influx of potential job candidates, given the circumstances.
You may see it 3 years down the road.
Yeah. And I'll even add to it because we made some recent hires too, and we saw a ton of applications, but there was very few, I guess, qualified applicants, like is the way I'd put it. And we were really lucky to find 3 that just or actually 4 that just fit exactly what we were looking for.
We were lucky.
We were really, really lucky. But when it came down to it, it was like, okay, well, we're not trying to hire for this position and this person fits like 2/3 of it, this person fits 1/3 of it. But there's a lot of people who wanted to work at a nursery, but they didn't fulfill the requirements that we needed for those positions.
Yeah, I think that's
I think it's easy to find people who want to work at a nursery in theory. And this is what we talked about the first time too.
That they have the mental image of like butterflies flying around them, and it's a beautiful day, and
stroll through the greenhouse, water a couple plants.
Yeah. You're leisurely like touching some plants and but it's you're pushing a lot of work into a small period of time through all weather conditions, and it's not always pleasant. You appreciate it, but it's hard. And that's why you were told not to get into this industry by someone that cared about you. So I know we're already over an hour and a half, and we should probably start to work towards wrapping up.
I have a couple hard hitting questions that I don't think will take very long.
Okay.
So I'm going to move into them. One of them was, like I said, we'll try and keep this part short, but one of the questions that I get all the time is, stuff with like pest and disease control. Do you guys do anything special? What are some ways, obviously working with natives, the insects are our friends. What are some things you guys are doing to try and change or deviate from the horticultural norm of dealing with insects and disease?
And I'll start off just by saying that's a tough one, because if we didn't spray anything, we wouldn't be in business.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the overall answer is we try to do as little as possible, Tom, because our customers are trying to avoid these sprays and they don't want us to be using certain chemicals and stuff like that. So, you can do a lot in terms of preventing certain unwanted pests just with, benign horticultural oils if they're applied at the right time. And, you're doing your scouting and things like that, watching your weather days and integrated pest management stuff. But literally, I have a pretty simple philosophy. If it's not going to kill the plant, I'm probably not spraying for it. I mean, the Japanese beetles just went through and they were pretty serious this year. We don't spray for them. We don't treat them. We don't trap them. You got to use Sevin and, other things. It's like they hit like 6 species. They gnaw on them for about 3 weeks or 4 weeks. And then, the plants look cosmetically compromised. There's no question they do. But you know what? It's about communication with your customer. It's like, listen, you don't want me to be spraying these things. So the side effect and the result of that is you're going to have some skeletalized leaves coming to you on your next delivery. But trust me, when you see the next set flushing out, there's no harm to this plant. So it's an educational process that you have to have with the communication with your customers on that sort of stuff. We get 10 caterpillars, we might just grab the whole thing with our hands, throw on the ground and stomp on them. But you do have to, like, fungicides are all but, critical for certain species or else they'll really devastate your crop. So, but we do stay away from the neonics. The spotted lanternfly, of course, is the big topic for us then around this area. But honestly, they're not really on our plants. Our plants are too small. If they're on our plants at all, they're just stopping over because they're just really poor flyers and they need a break for a second and then they're off. They're in the woods around us. We did some systemic treatments of a couple of trap trees last year, but we're kind of like watching it going, you know what are we doing? We're maybe hitting a couple thousand plants in an infestation of hundreds of thousands of millions of bugs. What is a couple of trees going to matter here? So we just try to take a pretty soft approach to it. And our greenhouse, our true greenhouse space, where you're looking at that, you have to have so much X amount of environment in a greenhouse before you can start introducing beneficials. And if you don't have enough of an infestation, you can't really even use the beneficials in some cases. So it's a balancing act, but we try to go as minimalist as we possibly can. That's the short answer.
How about you, Matt?
Yeah. So, this is obviously a really, hot topic for our industry, and not just for our industry, but for agriculture in general. And I would say here on Long Island, it's a really, really hot topic. I think we're probably kind of like the canary in the coal mine as it relates to, pesticide use and what's going to be approved or what's going to be outlawed. Mostly because we're in a sole source aquifer as well here on Long Island. So there's a lot of things that go into, the regulations by DEC for what we can or cannot use. So, part of the reason that we hired, I kind of mentioned before, we had hired a soil scientist out of UMass, and part of his job description is getting us to more biotype of controls. And so this year in particular was really the first year that we started experimenting with a lot more biocontrols. Now, I'm not going to say that everything that we do is biocontrol, but we have, eliminated neonics 100%. We now are using, and it's funny that Jim just mentioned it, because these are the topics that, these are the things that we talk about now during our production meetings, which are once a week, which is, okay, we just released, a couple, thousand, lady beetles, for example, and we know that the populations for them to prey upon are good in these greenhouses. And then, the next step after that is making sure that there's going to be another, crop of aphids, another hatch of aphids for them to continue to keep their numbers up. And so we have these kind of conversations about, where to release and where we're scouting and where we see the beneficials. And, we want to invest in these areas and we're trying to maintain these populations. So I've never talked about it as much as I've talked about it within the last 6 months, and for all the right reasons. But we started using, two basic companies, Arbico Organics and another company called BioWorks. And so we use both of those guys. No plug, they're not a sponsor or anything like that, but that's where we're getting this stuff from. We've even on our fungicides, we're using, beneficial biofungicides, at this point to control things, like powdery mildew is the biggest culprit, and anybody who's growing straight species Cornus Florida, struggles with that. It's a challenging tree to say the least. But so that's what we've been doing to kind of update our practices and make sure that we're like Jim said, we don't want to use any of these chemicals. We don't want to use any product in general. I mean, these products are expensive. If we could eliminate that from our cost base, we certainly would. And we try to do things culturally to make sure that we're minimizing our use of any product. But it's an ongoing learning curve for us. And these are some of the differences. These are some of the changes that we've been able to implement over the last couple months or last couple seasons, and we're still trying to evaluate what the right approach is. But certainly culturally, and I can't even tell you what we do now in our greenhouses to clean them out, to eliminate the amount of product that we use. I mean, now we go through our greenhouses and we're once a week everything is being cleaned out with pressure water, just cleaning, making sure that there's no algae, making sure that there's no decaying, leaf matter, so that we can eliminate things like fungus gnats. We're using beneficial nematodes. We're doing all these things, really trying to understand how can we just create a good growing environment with as little chemical as possible. None of us want to be around any of that stuff.
No, and I'm proud that we're all neonic free and we all do these things. The biggest thing is to reduce your footprint. And that's important. And like Jim said, part of it's education. Like when we ship at this time of the year, Eupatorium, we're communicating with the customer saying, we're sending you this plant based on its root system, not based on how it looks, from the soil up. But, one of the new hires that Tom mentioned about, like some of the things, the old model back in the day was you see an issue, you spray it. But now you're getting, hey, this is powdery mildew, but I put it under the microscope. I can see that it's not active. I can see that it's dead. There's no at this point, it's just,
it's residual.
It's visual. Yeah, it's residual, and it will be okay. We don't need to treat it. It's already taken care of itself. But there's an understanding, or we're having an issue with this plant, but maybe it's the soil in the greenhouse. We're not seeing an issue until the roots come out of the bottom of the pot and start to touch that soil. And maybe it's the soil, not our practices, and if we can do that, we can fix it without having to spray.
Yeah. So much, and like Matt, what you're saying, so much of it's cultural. And one of the things I've really invested in, and is, it was about 5 years ago, someone was saying they got moisture meters and really started to measure their watering. And when they did that, they cut their watering by like in half. And it was a panel actually. And like one person on the panel said, they cut it in half. Someone else said they cut it by like 75%. And everyone cut it by half or more. And even someone in the audience was like, oh yeah, I started using my watering by 80%. And I'm like, oh my God, how much water are you putting down? Yeah. And I've kind of brought that back. And then when I started using some moisture sensors and then really looking at stuff, you could run plants way, way drier than you thought you could. And when you did that, a lot of your fungal issues went away. A lot of your insect issues go away because the plant's healthier and it can fight it off on its own. Yeah. So that was a big thing. And that's another friend of ours who isn't on this panel, but Clear Ridge Nursery was one of the people who started using the moisture sensors and cut their watering back. And so their plants they finished faster, they were healthier, and they had way fewer issues. So,
When one of the propagators in our industry that I respect greatly is Tim McGinty at North Creek Nurseries, and I worked with him at a previous nursery, and he had a difficult task of replacing a propagator who had worked there for 45 years. And when he came in, he was just like, I don't think I've ever worked in such a dirty facility for creating life in plant material. And that was his biggest task, was just cleaning and keeping it clean. And the difference was unbelievable immediately. And it was just the cultural practices and changing that mindset. And it didn't need to be sprayed on the other end. It needed to be prevented on our end. So I think it's nice to see that we're all doing the right things.
Yeah. Here's another question for you guys. And we broached it a little bit earlier when we talked about costs and then the rising cost of plastics. Well, one of the things we hear a lot is, or what are the alternatives to plastics? Have you guys, now that the price is getting higher, well, there's some reason to look into switching. When plastic is cheap, it's a big headache to switch away from plastics. Have you guys explored that at all? Have you found any answers? So, Matt, I'll let you go first, since I know you're always
and it's okay if the
stuff.
answer is
the
no.
answer can be no.
Yeah.
So so the question is getting away from plastics and going into like a core based type pot, peat pot, whatever it is,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Some type of, yeah. So I mean, I think, like you said, we're exploring it. We haven't found one that we've really liked that does everything that we need it to do, and that that's been the challenge. So some of them don't have the right proper drainage holes for us. Some of it is just the bulk of the product and being able to get they don't stack like the plastic stacks too. So just from a space standpoint, there's so many things that go into it, or from a an assembly line standpoint, making good use of efficient time. So I'd like to think that we're going to get there, and I think we're going to get there probably. I don't want to put a timeline on it, but I'd like to think that we're going to get there in some extent. But we're also looking at the recycling of our plastics at this point as well, and some of that is going to, quite frankly, from what I'm hearing from most of the the plastic supply guys, is that it may be out of necessity more than even desire, just based on some of the the supply challenges that we're starting to see on plastics. And so this is something that we're really actively looking at, is in making sure that we can recycle not just our own pots, but maybe pots from outside, from other companies as well. We already take back our own, but from outside companies as well, as long as we can disinfect properly, and then it doesn't become, we can't afford to hire people and have that be their full-time job. But if we can do it in a way that makes sense, and we can disinfect and we can reuse, then that's something that we want to start incorporating more into our our normal routine.
That's awesome. I just think a lot of the products aren't quite there, or the technology isn't quite there yet. Like, we're all thinking about it. Jim, did you have anything to add to that?
The only thing that we're dealing with right now, or exploring with, is we're looking into we're using some of the grow bags for our 3, 5, and 7 gallons. And I think there's opportunities there. They've been out there for a long enough time now. There's some good support for that. They do a nice job. That, when you get into the really sort of ethical part of this conversation, they're recycled, soda bottles, essentially, or milk jugs in a lot of these situations, which is great. So the product has been repurposed, and then it's got a second use and a second life. But when you're done with it, you've still got a plastic product. And is it going to break down into the micros and all the microplastics and stuff like that? Because they generally, I'm not sure how reusable they are. And then now you're still talking about a landfill. Do you take them back? So it's not an easy answer right now. I do believe that we're going to like how they work. I think they'll work in most of our existing systems. You are using it, but then there's also some plastic manufacturers out there that use 70% recycled plastic. And then in the case of what Matt said, especially our smaller container seedlings, we actually will go around and pick those up from customers. It's worth it. It's an expensive product. It's only going to get worse with the things going on, but it's reusable for us for at least 3 growing seasons. And even if they get damaged, we'll use them as spacer pots as we grow them. So there's something to be said for reuse. And then, of course, right now the recycling market, I think with COVID, we'll have to see where all that goes, but it's been pretty flat ever since China stopped accepting. And so, it's only so what you can do recycling.
Even locally, they're having, because of COVID and the breaks in supply chain and how jobs are, our local recycling facility can't even get drivers to pick up. Like, instead of every other week, it may be once a month. They can't even get the material to the plant to even recycle it right now. So it's an issue. And I know that Tom and I have done an episode on this, and the research is going into it. I'm hoping that we hit it soon. So
our country needs to do a better job at getting a market for these things. Instead of exporting it, we could be an import. This could be an opportunity because of the supply chain. It's the product's there. We just need to put the infrastructure and the energy and the resources behind it to figure it out.
Totally agree. So I'm gonna wrap this up, and we're gonna go to the last question. I know we didn't get to all of our questions, but that's just a testament on how good this conversation was. We could easily talk for a way lot longer than this.
People could be asleep by now, though. Too.
They might be. They might be. But so we always end this with the same question. It started out as a simple question, but it tends to be the hardest question for most of our guests, and that is, what is your favorite plant? So our favorite native plant. I'm sorry. So Matt, we'll let you go first. It can be
Those should be the same thing with this group. The favorite plant, favorite
that's
native
true.
plant.
I shouldn't have to say that, but
Yeah, fair enough. I'm going to go with sassafras.
ooh, nice.
Sassafras is my favorite I like everything about it. I like the color of the bark as it grows. I like, the quirkiness of the foliage and having, 3 different sets of leaves on it. I love the fall color on it. I love the fragrance when you crush the leaf, and I love the flower in the springtime, just the subtlety of it when you see it growing. That's a pretty easy question for me.
That's a great plant. That's a very popular native plant too. I think that's it's.
If you ask that every time, I'm worried that everybody else has said that plant.
No one has said it. No, that's the first time someone has said
it. All right, good.
So awesome. How about you, Jim?
Well, actually, Matt, it was on my short list. I got a 20-foot sassafras in my backyard. It's a signature tree. But if I have to select just one, I'm going to go with sycamore. I don't know. I grew up with it in all of the streams, and the connection to the Native American, the ghost tree. The wood is fantastic. Not from a standpoint of forestry. I have a tendency to like plants that most of the forestry community would think are weeds. But I don't know, there's just a lot of things that I like about it. Sassafras, I love. And then if you go to a shrub, I'd probably have to go with spice bush is probably one of my favorite shrubs. But of course, I also like sassafras, but it's also one of the more bears for us to grow in our nursery. But, colonizer and, root suckering and, all that stuff makes it challenging from a propagation standpoint.
Exactly. It makes me like it even more because of that.
Me too. I like the challenges.
Yeah. So we always kind of end up with a final thought, and what we will do is give each of you the floor for a minute or two, and you can use it if you want to summarize, if you want to plug something, if you want to mention something maybe we didn't bring up, but we just kind of give each person a final thought just to kind of end the show on. Jim, I'm going to hand it over to you. Use your time however you'd like.
I think, I actually already did hit on it. I think that for people that are listening to this, they need to go out and start looking at and talking to their growers and whether they're retailers or wholesalers, and observe what's happening to our industry. I think everybody can be a part of this. Many people helped create the native plant movement, but this is industry wide. I have concerns about the state of this industry, and I think it's going to take a lot of people to be engaged to try to see how we turn this around. Some of it'll be technology, but you got to have people that understand technology and understand the business to come in to do that. So it's going to have almost like what Matt's talking about. You have to blend professions here to solve some of these problems. And I have a tendency to be a big picture guy, and I have concerns about things right now. So I'm generally an optimist too. And I don't mean to end on a sad note, but there's some real issues confronting this industry, and I think they have to be addressed. So that's probably it. And then I would also just say, hey, I love dealing with, Pinelands, and Matt, you guys are awesome.
Awesome. Thank you. That's a great final thought. How about you, Matt?
Yeah. I think I'm just going to use my time to, number one, really thank you guys all for having me and Jim on this show. Tom, your parents, your father in particular. I remember listening to him speak at a couple of events and kind of going through his whole, the history that led him down the path, and him being a forester and pollinating Pinus rigida, in the Pine Barrens. Actually, I think he was actually on Long Island and doing some of his research. Mm-hmm. And, I'm so appreciative of being in an industry that has mentors like the 3 of you guys and Tom, like your parents. You guys have really helped pave the way for the native industry. And for the nursery industry in general. And so, thank you guys for doing what you're doing. Thank you guys for raising awareness through efforts like this and your podcast. And Jim, I think, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, there's a lot of work that needs to be done from an industry standpoint, from a generational standpoint. So just kudos to all you guys for doing what you're doing. And I really appreciate you inviting me to be, a part of this podcast. And, we're trying to make you guys proud, and I appreciate, all your help as vendors and partners from a business standpoint as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank both of you for the kind words.
Yeah,
we
thank
appreciate
you very
it. Tom, would you like to go, or you want me to go?
Yeah, I can go.
Okay.
I'll come up with something. No, basically what I really want to hit on is, as mentioned like a bunch of times, it's hard to find people who wanted, I don't want to say want to do this, but the nursery industry in particular is really driven. It's somewhere in between agriculture and conventional horticulture. Some of these big greenhouse chains, it's pretty easy to get people because, well, you can get all these, that's where the people coming out of college want to go. But some of the smaller, what's the word I'm looking for? Family run businesses, it's hard to find people because, like, when we were looking, well, we need someone who can wear 5 different hats. And it's hard to find that without finding 5 different people. And we were just able to do it. But yeah, it's a tough it's a tough industry to be in, and a lot of people are aging out. There's a lot of, like we've said it a bunch, there's not a lot of young people who are coming into it, and it's hard to start one because it requires a lot of capital to do so. So yeah.
Awesome. I'm along the same lines, and that's a great final thought. The nursery industry is an easier industry to get out of than it is to stay in. None of us, and this isn't crying poor mouth, none of us got in this industry to line our pockets with gold. Not saying that we're hurting for money or lifestyle. We all do well, but it's not an industry that you're going to go into and become a billionaire. It's not going to happen. And you do it because of the love of it. Much like agriculture, much like farming, I find a lot of common threads there. And we still have a long way to come. And the only way to do that a lot of times is with solidarity, doing just what we're doing right now, and being friendly competitors. Even though we compete, we work together. And I want to thank both of you for coming on and sharing what you've shared with us and with us and our listeners. And we're happy to be able to do the same. And that's the only way we move this forward is together. And we need more of that, actually, to be quite honest. So hopefully this is one small step towards a greater future. And hopefully to our listeners that aren't from the industry, they gained a greater insight to what it takes to give you that plant that you fell in love with, to have that planted in your yard. It takes a lot of sweat and labor and love to get you that plant. So thank you all so much for being a part of this today. We really appreciate that.
Yeah, if I could change my final thought, it would be just that. We're lucky to work in a sector of the industry that really cares about what they're doing. It's not just a plant that's going out on the back of the truck. Yeah, it's knowing that plant's actually making a difference too, and putting in a lot of love to it. So yeah, that was a great final thought, Fran.
Wow,
you
that may be a first.
Else, so I want to compliment you too.
Thank you. Thank you.
As we like to say, we expect our plants to work for their dinner. Our plants and native plants are going out there and they're working hard. They're working really hard. They don't have an easy job. They're not, so you got to work hard to get them to that point.
I agree.
Well, that is it. We want to thank you for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed listening to our rooted discussion. For more information, visit the Native Plants Healthy Planet website. For links, we're going to put up that link to that article.
Yes.
Jim, if you can send it to us, we'll put that on the website as well. And you'll be able to find the websites for each of these nurseries on there as well. I lost my place. Oh, yeah. Thank you, everyone, for listening to Native Plants Healthy Planet, presented by Pinelands Nursery.
As always, we're going to give a huge shout out to RJ Comer for contributing our theme music to Rooted Discussions. Make sure you download or stream his music wherever you consume your music, iTunes, Spotify. You can follow us on Twitter at Pineland Nursery, Facebook at Pinelands Nursery NJ, Instagram at Pinelands Nursery or Native Plants _Healthy Planet, and YouTube at Pinelands Nursery. Keep calling the question and comment line. We had a lot of great calls on the last buzz, and more calls came in since then. We're really excited about it. The number is 215-346-6189. I will repeat that, 215-346-6189. When we play your question on a future buzz, we'll answer it and hopefully give you some good insight. Sometimes we've got nothing, but hopefully we can answer your question or give you some insight into what you're curious about. So, and let's not forget the Native Plants Healthy Planet Facebook group. We're just shy of that 500 mark, so it just keeps growing every episode. So, and the conversations this week have been off the chart. So thank you for everyone that's been posting so much in the Facebook group, and let's keep it going there.
I have in here that I'm supposed to give a shirt update, but I forgot to look before the episode.
But we are wearing our.
I figured when we get to 500 is when we'll make the first donation, which we're pretty close to. Yeah, we're wearing new shirts. I'm going to show a snippet of mine. I can't. It's not released yet, so I can't show the whole thing.
Yeah.
But
for our listeners that don't know, the shirts, 100% of the proceeds are being donated to certain nonprofit organizations. Certain shirts, the proceeds will go directly to that nonprofit. We have one for the Xerces Society. We have one for New Jersey Audubon. Some of them will just be, it goes into a pool, and when we have enough money, it will benefit so many of these great nonprofits that have been guests on our website. So if you buy a shirt, you're spreading the message, and you're doing a lot of good we're keeping none of that money. It's going to the people that matter.
As always, you can listen to Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast directly at our website, which is www.nativeplantshealthyplanet.com, which I found out we had another person who listens through the website that we've converted to listening through more modern ways like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podbean, Stitcher, really wherever you consume your podcast. When you're there, if you can do us a huge favor, leave a 5-star review and hit subscribe. It makes a big difference. And as always, share it with a friend. We want to keep spreading this message. So with that, thank you, everyone. I'm Tom.
And I am Fran. Thank you again, everyone, for listening. Thank you to Jim and Matt. Thank you so much for being a part of this episode. And thank you for listening and being part of this. Coming up next week, we have a new episode of The Buzz, subject to be determined. Until then, keep it native.
Thank you for listening to the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast, presented by Pinelands Nursery. Remember to like, share, follow, and comment.